So look, thank you, everybody. I'm one of the co-chairs for MEAA's Wellbeing Committee with Kathy Lapan-Walker and Sophie Carter, and we're really thrilled that you're joining us today. I've been a journalist for a very long time, and I sort of got into the vicarious trauma and wellbeing space about 10 years ago. So one of the things I do, I'm still a freelance journalist, but I have my own little business where I do media training, trauma training, I do freelance journalism, I do corporate research. I'm on a couple of boards and do a whole lot of different stuff. But this is the stuff that I really am very passionate about and really love to share. So I'm really pleased to be here and excited to be sharing what I know with you. I do want to just let you know that some of the things that I'm talking about will be a little delicate, might be triggering. So I just want to put that content warning up there. If you feel that it's a bit too much, I will not be offended if you need to leave the space. Please do look after yourself and reach out to Kathy, Sophie, or me if you need any kind of support after the fact as well. So who am I? Well, I've been a journalist for 37 years, a very long time. That's me as a very young reporter in Alice Springs in about 1988. That's the left in my little office there. In the middle, it's me in Moscow in about 2011, 2012. There were anti-government protests there. I was freelancing there. And then on the right, that's a press conference where we're waiting for Dan Andrews, the Victorian Premier during COVID. I left the ABC probably within sort of 5 or 6 months of that. So I've been around a while, done a lot of different things and covered quite a number of kind of challenging stories in my time. Up the top left, that's when I was in Bangkok. From the time I was first a correspondent in Bangkok, military coup 6 weeks after I arrived in Bangkok, and suddenly that was sort of setting the tone for the next 3 years, and there was just always unrest on the streets. And this was actually the ASEAN summit in Pattaya, just outside of Bangkok, and that was when Kevin Rudd, as the Prime Minister at the time, his plane had to be turned around because these rioters managed to get right inside the venue where world leaders were going to be. I covered courts for a number of years in Melbourne. I've covered bushfires. I've covered drownings, suicide in rural areas, and other kind of very confronting stories. So but it was really on this day in this place, Tyab, Victoria, which is south of Melbourne, on the February 13th in 2014, where I guess things really shifted for me as a journalist, and when I started to understand this area a whole lot more. And that was the death of Luke Batty, the young boy whose father killed him. And that's his mother, Rosie Batty, who a lot of you would recognize. She's become a household name, in sad circumstances. The work she does is fantastic, but it was losing her son at that time. And I was at the press conference, or the doorstop, as we call them, when she came out of her house, and nobody really knew who she was. There were probably a group of 5 or 6 journalists, and we didn't really know who she was initially. And then she kind of spoke to us for 20 minutes or thereabouts, just talking about her love for Luke. She was so gracious and empathetic to Greg, her former partner, who she always thought she would be the one who would end up being killed, but it was Luke. And she told us that Luke knew something was going on. So it was this extraordinary outpouring of not just grief but empathy, and she was critical of the police system, the legal system. So many systems failed Luke Batty, and she's become this incredible advocate for doing things better. So I was there that day, and I went to the Oval, and I hate those stories. I really hate those stories. But after Rosie spoke, I knew I had a fantastic story. She was so elegant, and that's part of our issue as journalists, and I imagine some in your other areas as well. Some of our highest moments in our careers are at other people's lowest moments. So there's real kind of push and pull on emotions and how we feel about these things. But this story, talking of emojis, it undid me. I had been a journalist for a very long time. I was tough correspondent. I'd been here, I'd been there, I'd been everywhere. And the next day I sort of said to my colleagues, I can't do this story, because ordinarily I would have followed that story, and it's just like, I can't, and I spent the next couple of days under the doona in Melbourne. And people, it's just like, I was the one who would go up against the bosses, and I was always the really feisty one, and suddenly I totally lost my cool. So it set me on a path understanding my own, the buildup of trauma in my own life, but also becoming a real proselytizer for trauma awareness, vicarious trauma awareness, and trauma-informed practice. So I was an ABC peer supporter. I trained within the ABC to look when they're doing difficult stories, reaching out to them as somebody who knows what their workload is and how they're working, but also has an understanding of the difficulties that they're dealing with after you're covering difficult court stories or accidents or fires or whatever it might be. I also did a number of programs through the DART Centre, which is an organisation that specialises in journalism and trauma. And I was, in fact, the chair of the DART Centre Asia Pacific for a couple of years, and I did a number of their programs. I was a fellow at Columbia University in New York. That's the photos of my mates from the 2019 intake. So though from all around the world, incredible journalists doing really incredible work that is really deep and dark at times. So it was such a pleasure and a thrill to be part of that, and a real honor. So it's important for you folks to know that I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a trained counselor. Instead, I like to say that I have an educated ear and a sympathetic shoulder. So I've got tools and tricks and a good understanding, but I don't have formal qualifications. I can't tell you if you have PTSD or anything like that. And that's not a role I want. I like the fact that I can be a peer, and that the discussions I have so often are actually as much about the editorial and how we did our story as much as it is about the difficulties we're going through. So Vicarious Trauma via Phoenix Australia, which does a lot of work with first responders, but it's also, has expertise in the space more broadly, talks about it being the indirect exposure to other people's trauma in such a way that it actually has the same harmful effect on our mental health as experienced trauma directly. In the journalist context, it used to be that you only ever sympathy was only ever given to war correspondents because they were seeing the blood and the guts and not realizing that domestically covering stories, but also the people who are filming, the people who are editing, the people who are dispatching and producing material are also seeing this and seeing it in a deep, difficult way. So, and when you have this experience of the stress and anxiety related to vicarious trauma, it can directly affect your mental health. And so trying to mitigate it can really improve and manage your health. And that's where the work that I've been doing is trying to mitigate the exposures that we have. Who can be affected? Well, journalists, actors, screenwriters, producers, editors, crew, musicians, support staff, managers. We all in some way, gig musicians are so often exposed to really difficult environments. Crews, actors might be filming a very, very sensitive, difficult, violence. You're acting it out, but it still can be very real. That's the idea, right? And of course, film and live events also, as much as it is for us in media. So in short, anyone who's part of that creative process can really be impacted by vicarious trauma. And there's no one size fits all. Everybody responds differently. I obviously had quite an immediate response to the Rosie baddie, Luke baddie situation, but I had, been exposed in the past and not really felt it, or it had been delayed, or I didn't realize what was going on, because it can be delayed. And then there are some people who will never, never, never feel the impact of the trauma that they've seen. It's just, we're all different. We've got different folks, different stokes, and it's just, there's no right or wrong way that you respond. So when it comes to vicarious trauma, we want to recognize it, we want to respond to it, and if necessary, refer. So to recognize it, what we're watching for is changes in us, or kind of troubling behavior or troubling responses, trouble sleeping, anxiety, depression, difficulty concentrating, that emotional roller coaster. Now, in reality, most of us experience some of this at some point. So again, it's something that is out of the ordinary. It's something that's different that you explain. If you usually have a little bit of depression, maybe it's deeper or darker or longer. So it's about something that's really out of the ordinary. And here are some of the more kind of classic vicarious trauma responses. isolation. You aren't seeing the people that you normally see. You're closing yourself off. You're disengaged. You're not doing the things that you would ordinarily do and you like to do, your sport or your music or going out and seeing your friends. That hypervigilance where you're watching your back. You might be snappy or you're really kind of just on alert all the time. Risky behavior that's out of character, sexual relationships, or you're driving your car too fast, or you're doing something that you don't ordinarily do that's risky. And that's not a judgment call. It's just something that's different from what you normally would. Nightmares and flashbacks are pretty standard red flags for that kind of trauma response. Use and abuse of drugs or alcohol. Similarly, again, this isn't to judge. When I was in Bangkok, my bottle of gin was my best friend, I will concede. Thankfully, I have a non-drinking husband who probably managed to keep me off the streets more than he needed to. But, we all have coping mechanisms, and it's important to recognize it and then try and figure out what it is that might have caused this or be making us behave differently. Nightmares and flashbacks was another kind of thing that I had post the Rosie Batty experience. And in chatting to a counselor, I sort of said, I'm having this weird flashback about, it's just I'm underwater. And she said, oh, that's weird. Maybe, and she said, check your diary. What have you been covering? And it turns out I'd covered 3 drownings in 10 days, and it hadn't even clocked with me until she mentioned it. So that was my body, she says, that was basically trying to tell me to stand up and pay attention. So these kinds of things are the things to watch out. This is not an exhaustive supply. This is also not, to diagnose, or these aren't symptoms per se. It's not to sort of say, oh, well, I definitely got PTSD because I've got these things. These are just some of the things to be mindful of. And it is really important to understand that there are physical ramifications for trauma exposure, not just psychological. There are biological, chemical things that happen in your body when you see extreme things and experience extreme things. I'm not the expert on that, but it's not just in your head. Stuff actually happens in your body, and there are physical health ramifications that happen from it. It also impacts your ability to process information. And from a journalist's point of view, that can be somebody tells you one thing 1 minute and something completely different the next. And when you're interviewing, that becomes a bit difficult. You kind of, are they telling the truth or they're not telling the truth? It's not about that. It's just that their brain is working in a different way, and processing information, sharing information can be really difficult. So we just have to be really mindful that somebody may not be trying to mislead us just because they've said something different. And people who've been exposed to trauma can feel shame, because of the way they're feeling and the way they're responding and their behavior. And, they might have survived something that somebody else didn't. So it's complicated, the responses and the impact. So here we go, responding. You might be overwhelmed. You're feeling sad, you're feeling angry, you're feeling unsettled. So what are you going to do about it? Well, in the immediate instance, you want to be breathing to calm you down. Some of those breathing exercises, I'm sure most of you would be familiar with the kinds of things that you can do just to slow your heart rate and to get yourself kind of a bit more centered. Those grounding exercises are really good for that as well. Just kind of feeling the ground, feeling the parts of your body, just to kind of really distract yourself and do something different. Reaching out to those you can trust, that's a really important thing to do if you're comfortable sort of in that sort of debrief situation, is having somebody assist you. So talking about it can be really, really important. Doing something can be really, really important. It might be just walking away, going for a walk, clearing your head, just trying to get a sense of what's going on and distracting yourself. But having a plan is really important. And that's what, I'll talk about a self-care plan a little later, because it's really, really important that we have lots of different tools in our toolbox to be able to assist ourselves and even others as well in how we cope with what's going on in our lives, and if we are feeling that we can't get through a moment. So trying to get ourselves through that kind of a overwhelming moment, and then build up to how you kind of deal with things in the longer term. So for example, I have a photo album on my phone that's called Self-Care, where when I look at each of those photos, it brings back good memories, or it makes me feel good, or reminds me of something. I also very often go to Gloria Gaynor if I need that kind of anthem, that ladies anthem, I Will Survive. I will kind of crank up a little bit of Gloria. And if I need to feel sad, I'm going to go to the Style Council and my 16-year-old self and the lamenting love songs that they played then. So there are different things I do to kind of distract myself to get me through the moment. So I would use these techniques when I was covering a difficult court story, for example. If I, I've filed my first couple of stories, but I know I've still got a whole lot of work to do. But I've got 20 minutes where I can scarf some lunch down and I can try and reset my brain a little. And I will go for a walk and listen to this in my headphones or look at the photographs or whatever to be able to kind of G myself up for the next bit, then get through the day and then collapse in the couch at the end of the day. But these are kind of things that you can be doing for yourself. Calling the people that you love, getting out in the garden, baking a cake, riding your bike, tinkering with something, having a glass of wine or a glass of gin, but not too many. One of the things I did during COVID was asking friends to share videos and photos. There was a friend who had a baby, and her little baby girl had just the most incredibly expressive faces, even as a newborn. So she would post a photo, and every now and again I sort of say, "Oh, I need a photo," and just this amazing, because she just had this kind of the weirdest looks on her face, and she still does. She's just got this great really character-filled face. Ditto, another friend had a puppy at that stage, and she would share, and Swirly was just super, super cute. So those things that really kind of help you get out of yourself, get out of your head. And there was this great thing that came out of Headspace. I love this poster, acts of self-care during isolation, cuddling a pet, having a chat. Maintaining connections is one of the most important things you can do when you are feeling overwhelmed and feeling a bit isolated. If you're exposed to things, is just having that chat, is that reaching out to people, getting some fresh air, reading a book, playing music. Having a morning ritual, this is another really important one that, isn't just a COVID thing. This is something that I actually think is really important for all of us. And I know certainly in the acting sphere, you do that de-rolling where you actually have to get into and out of character. This is a bit similar to, in fact, start and end your workday. And so, particularly in the work from home context, it's really important. So, my ritual is most days I go down, have my cup of coffee, I sit out and I look into my garden when it's raining, and hopefully go into my and just kind of prepare myself for the day. And then I come upstairs, get dressed, open up my computer, and off I go. But it might be you walk your dog to begin with, or you do some meditation. But it is, and at the end of the day, I shut down my computer, I close the door, and I do something different. So those kind of rituals that you can set up for yourself can be really good in being able to take care of yourself. Making a self-care plan, baking, dancing, reading, music, art, flowers, garden. And this is something that I do when I'm training. I actually have a sheet that people can fill out on the one side is, here are the things to watch for yourself, and then on the other side is, here are the things that I'm going to do. If you're prone to be working in this kind of environment, I find it really, really helpful, because it's literally a plan. It's literally like, okay, I'm going to call my dad and he's going to tell me a joke. I'm going to call my friend and they're going to send me a photo of their dog. So it's just a really, when you're feeling overwhelmed, you've actually got something that you can turn to. When it comes to others, we're trying to respond to others, and we've all been in that situation where we've got colleagues, friends, family who we know are not coping, and they might have come to us, or we can see we're in a situation where we can reach out and help them. So, one of the most important things to do is to listen. And just listen, is just, what do you want to tell me? Offering help. What can I do for you? Is there anything I can do for you? Sometimes people don't actually want you to do anything. They just want you to listen. They just want somebody to be there, to be present. And then after the fact is checking in later. I did a terrific conference last week. There was in the Northern Hemisphere, journalists from across Europe and North America. It was kind of almost the first of its kind in trauma responses. And they had so many great guests and talking about exactly this kind of thing, and how we deal with this, and how our craft and our profession is impacted by the kinds of things that we cover. One of the things that's really important is to set boundaries. And that's something I do in my role as a journalist. And this will be something that would need a bit of thinking about how you do it in your separate environments. But as a journalist, if I'm interviewing somebody in a sensitive subject, I will say to them, my role is to be the journalist, is to gather the news here to tell your story, but I can't promise the law is going to change. I can't promise that that person will go to jail. We need to be really clear about our roles. And also giving them the ability to set boundaries as well. When I'm interviewing somebody, I will say to them, are there areas you just don't want to talk about? But feel free to put some boundaries around what you do and don't want to say. And then sometimes that environment that we find ourselves in journalism is that you might be the first person that person's ever actually disclosed something to. So they see you very much as a really important person in their, their story. And yes, you are, but there's only so much you can do. Like I say, you have to set those boundaries. So sometimes having the do not disturb and the turning off your notifications, and also just being very clear about my time. And this is something that is applicable in all our industries. We so often are working, we don't work regular hours, whether you're singing somewhere or you're acting somewhere, you're on the stage, you're in a set, you're coming back from a set. Journalists are having to respond to things all the time. So our hours can be really erratic and really weird. So all the more reason when and if you set those parameters, because we're already pulled a lot. And we'll all have tensions with our private lives and our professional lives. Families get cross when you're paying attention because a story has broken or something's going on. So protecting your time and your life when you can is really important if you can. So trauma-informed practice is putting understanding and empathy at the center of what you do. It's essentially putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. So you might be, witnessing somebody who's a bit distressed on your set or in your workplace, and just having a bit of an understanding about why that might be. Trauma-informed practice empowers survivors. It's about So when I'm interviewing somebody, I will not just sort of allow them to set boundaries, but it's also, are you comfortable in this location? Are you feeling all right? So it's actually giving agency. One of the things that trauma does to somebody is that they've lost control. So if you're able to give them control in some circumstances, that's actually quite empowering for them. And trauma-informed practice protects everybody. It's good for you. It's good for the people that you're interviewing or the people that you're dealing with. So when you're dealing with traumatized people, you want to be kind of watching their responses. They might dissociate. They might sort of suddenly be talking to you and then, oh my goodness, you've lost them. They're not even there anymore. So trying to kind of bring them back. You want to listen with empathy, obviously. Trying to comfort them if you've got tissues or water if you know that you're going to be talking to somebody who's got and it's going to be a difficult conversation. Reassuring language is important as well, and I'll touch a bit more on that. Taking a break is literally just stopping and sort of say, hey, why don't we just stop for a bit to allow you to collect your thoughts or whatever. Reassuring and reflective language is really important when you're dealing with people who are traumatized. I can see this is hard for you. A lot of people feel this way. It's natural to be feeling this way. You're not alone. That's kind of, again, it's giving agency. It's reassuring them. It's really supporting what they're trying to do. And it's a very simple way to provide comfort and agency. Kate Porterfield, this woman here, is a brilliant psychologist in New York. She does a lot of work with the Dart Center at Columbia University, and she does brilliant work she talks to, as a psychologist, a lot of deeply traumatized people. So people who've gone through torture or war or have been abused in other ways or refugees. She works really deep, dark down in the weeds, and she's an extraordinary woman who has come up with a lot of great techniques about how you can actually give agency and assist people. So one of them is just taking notice. It's just looking, it's just listening, it's just sort of being really in tune with the person who's in front of you, asking them how they're feeling. You're all right with that? Everything's good? Yeah, fabulous. You know, is it okay if we now start to talk about X, Y, and Z? Do we need to take a break? And at the website there, traumaawarejournalism.org, there's some really fantastic interviews with lots of journalists and media workers who've been involved in this space. They will be, for those of you outside of journalism, they may be of lesser interest, but Kate's interview is really good. It's only 7 or 8 minutes. I can find the link to that particular interview, but it's really wonderful in just, she's just such a human, but also knows that we've got a job to do. And that's the difficult balance that we have so far. So I absolutely encourage you to go and have a look at that, because it's just a really great way, no matter what kind of situation you're in, is just being able to really be empathetic and kind. You know, she's just a really kind person. So, and I'm just a total fangirl. I just love her so much. I've seen her speak 5 or 6 times, and every time I come away with something really different. And so she's just a wonderful person. But there's other resources on that website. They're free to use that might be of interest as well. So refer. One of the things that's important is that, you know, if your self-care plan's not working, and the things you're trying to do to help yourself is, you know, do you have a psychologist, or do you have somebody who's professional who can help you? And if you do, then knowing when it's time to speak to somebody professional. I also like to have resources with me when I'm either doing interviews or I know I'm going to be dealing with difficult people, because there'll be times when I'm out of my depth. I need to know when I'm out of my depth, when I don't have the skills to go anymore. And I might, you know, think about getting Lifeline on the phone if I've got somebody who I feel is maybe going to self-harm, or there's something that I can't talk through. Is actually having somebody that you can call to kind of go, hey, I'm talking to so-and-so, we're together, and I'm hoping you might be able to help me with something. And that might also be something you do with a psychologist and a professional. But it's really knowing when, for yourself and others, that you know that it's time to pass on the baton to somebody else, who's somebody professional who can do it, because I know that I'm not capable of doing that all the time. Did I hear some online spaces that that will also be able to assist you? So there's the making the self-care plan. If we wanted to go into that, I'm mindful that we're 10 past 7, and I do want to leave some time for questions. So I'm happy to do something different or offline with people in their self-care plan, but I'm happy to take some questions.